So let's get into that. What do we need to know? What do we need to understand about performance tuning?
Sure. Do we want to pull up the fancy diagram?
Let's do it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of there's a lot of places to look. Oh geez, it doesn't like my custom Lexan font, so there's some stuff that's cut off, which is fine. So this can look kind of overwhelming, right? But I think there's some simple places to get started. And if you only learn 3 things about performance tuning, well, I'll say 4. If you learn 4 things about performance tuning, there's a couple things that if you do these, you'll get good performance 95% of the time. And there's a couple tools that if you learn how to use these, you can address most issues, right? Let me see if I can actually pull up. Hold on. Hey, so in terms of tooling, these are the 2 that I recommend that you learn first. Performance Analyzer is built into Power BI Desktop, and it provides a ton of useful information because you can refresh a whole page, you can refresh a single visual, and it'll tell you how much was the DAX code, how much was the rendering, and how much was other, which from my understanding can be background processing, weighting, that kind of stuff. And it's very valuable because if I were to just guess, I've been wrong plenty of times. I might look at a table and a lot of it's DAX, or I may look at a visual that is really complicated and really pretty and think, oh, the DAX is slow, I've written bad DAX, and it's taking 4 milliseconds to return the data. So being able to distinguish that is awesome. And then DAX Studio is great for being able to run the queries and get more detailed information, right? So they did just add DAX Query View, but from what I understand, you're basically getting the runtime. DAX Studio is a lot more like SQL Server Management Studio, but for DAX.
It goes one bit deeper, right?
Yeah. If you really want to see the internals, that's the tool to use. It's completely free. You can clear out the cache, so every time you run, you get a more accurate reading. You can see how much is the formula engine, which is flexible but slow, or the storage engine, which is limited but fast. You can even look at the execution plans, but they're just gibberish, so good luck with that. I miss my visual execution plans from SQL Server.
I mean, there is stuff that you can do with those, but yeah, sure.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so I need to learn. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that I see people do now is actually, or also the workflow that I tend to use now is I actually take the performance analyzer, take the query, paste it in DAX Query View because, hey, it's already there in the tool. So at least I get a basic understanding of what this DAX is doing. And if I spot immediate issues right there, I don't have to go to another tool and dive deeper.
Right.
Because DAX Studio is great, but it also gives me so much detail.
Yes, it can be overwhelming for sure, especially if you don't know how to use it.
Right. So if I can already catch the problem with just one view of the data instead of all the details with, like, the formula engine and the storage engine, etc., it's just easier for me to work with and process real quick. Which one of the 2 engines is single threaded again? I always mix those 2 up. Do you know?
Pretty sure it's the formula engine.
Right. There's one of the 2, right?
Because the storage engine, I'm pretty sure is multi-core. I think it works on a segment at a time. Yeah,
the formula engine is the one that is the multi-threaded.
So
single-threaded one, right? Yeah.
So I don't. Yeah. So there's a color coding here. I don't have it labeled, but one of the things that I wanted to help people understand is the ones that are yellow and black are either built into the tooling or built into your browser. And those are the ones that you really want to look at first, because a lot of people don't have permission to install stuff on their machine, right? And so no matter where you work, these tools are going to be available. Some are easier to use than others, like the query diagnostics can be a little bit challenging to read because it's this big table of information. But start with those. The next thing is the purple ones are provided by Microsoft. Generally, these are things that are outside, usually having to do with either SQL Server or SQL Server Analysis Services, which is the engine that runs DAX behind the scenes. And so the second thing to learn is the Microsoft stuff, because you're going to get the most support and long-lasting kind of support. And then finally, when you need to go really deep, that's when you start looking at these community tools. And something else that DAX Studio can do and some of these other ones can do is to tell you how big is your model and what's taking up the space, right? Because you would very often be surprised that, okay, this is just a simple date column or an ID column or a GUID or something like that. And you can have 10x variation in compression between columns, depending on whether it's all unique values or it's a date time and you don't actually need the time, so you could cut that off or what have you. And even worse, there's features built in to make life easier for new users. So I'm thinking auto date time, which at a very large model makes these tables that can take up space and you don't even see them. They're hiding them from you.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can use something like DAX Studio to see how much space that's taking up. And I had one customer where we were dealing with, I think it was like tens of millions of rows, and it was a meaningful performance improvement.
So
right?
Is that big DAX hiding stuff from you?
That's right. They don't want you to know.
Sorry, this is a throwback to a
TikTok we did.
On SQL Bits last year, right? I think so.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that was the first time I met you, Eugene, when you made that TikTok.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes.
Well,
Big DAX.
I will be back.
TikTok.
I will be back at SQL Bits. Somehow they invited me back.
Awesome.
So,
good.
So I recommend, like I said, those two tools to start with. But the other thing is, in terms of best practices, there's a couple things that will give you great success right out of the box. So one is query folding. So learn about query folding. Alex Powers has a 30-day challenge where you can practice and learn. Most of the time, though, query folding just works. And this is one of the reasons why performance tuning can be such a frustration, is because of query folding and because of the in-memory engine for DAX. Most of the time, Power BI is lightning fast. But when you do things that run against that grain, that don't work with that anymore, suddenly it slows down and you don't know why. With query folding, a common issue is people will handcraft artisanal SQL queries. And unfortunately, the Power Query engine most of the time will say, oh, this is your grandma's lasagna recipe. I don't want to mess it up, so I'm not going to do query folding. Now, there's value.native query or some niche thing you can do to work with that. But in general, just go through the GUI. Go click the buttons instead of handcrafting your artisanal SQL queries, right?
Right.
So query folding is a big one.
Yep.
Second big one, follow a star schema. Now, sometimes people will just shout it without providing any context. I find that a little bit frustrating. Because when I was learning this, like the data warehousing stuff, I didn't know what a role-playing dimension was, a junk dimension. Like, it was overwhelming. But the key part is try to focus on centralized transaction or fact tables, and then one-to-many relationships from your dimension or lookup tables. And even if you don't know why, by default, you'll get better compression, better performance, simpler DAX code, and it'll just run smoother, right? You'll fall into the pit of success, so to speak. As I think Scott Hanselman, might have been Scott Hanselman, would say about like C# and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So those are the like really big things, is start with some of these tools, focus on some of the key best practices, and then as you get more comfortable, learn some of the other tools, learn some more about internals and that sort of thing.
So here's like, the star schema is really the foundation again of your solution, right? And that's basically like it. I've been saying foundation and house and using that a lot, but basically that's what this is again. Like, you know, just as much as you want to think about your one lake structure before you do all the rest of the Fabric stuff on top, this is the same thing. Like, do it. Now there's a problem here, because for a lot of people, it feels like creating a star schema is almost like black magic.
Sure.
It's like it's really tough to do if you have no clue. You have never done this before. You're coming from an Excel background. Yes. How do you even start building a star schema? I wish somebody would just, I don't know, build something that at least tries to recommend the star schema for you. So at least when you load data for the first time, or you connect to a certain database or one lake or whatever for the first time, and it doesn't have all these beautiful layers, at least you get some starting point. There should be something in the product or maybe the community that will help us with that eventually, because I think this is one of the core problems that people are still hitting is like, you can read all about star schemas, but actually doing it and knowing how to do it properly is not easy.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I do recommend analyzing data with Microsoft Power BI and Power Pivot for Excel, which is a mouthful, and by the infamous Italians. This book helped me understand some of those fundamental concepts. Now,
Right.
they go a little bit hard on some of this stuff. Dirty secret, I've done work with a header and line item schema, and no one died. It was okay. But that's because these guys are used to scaling up to billions of rows.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
they want you to do it right because they've seen what happens whenever you don't.
Right.
But
And
this
I'll
is a
just
great,
shout out 2 more recommendations.
Yeah,
One
please.
from the chat. This one, Nicholas
Oh.
brought it up. So that's one.
Okay.
That's really good. I think it's called Star Schema, not Start Schema, if I'm not mistaken, but I might be wrong. So, and then the other one is the classic. The classic thing about building a star schema is Kimball's
Right.
data warehousing toolkit, right?
Has anyone finished the Kimball book though? They're so big.
Multiple times. Like
Multiple times. Oh,
Yeah.
show off.
So, I mean, but for me, the reason why I still like that book, I know the first edition was written in whatever, 70 something, I
Something
think.
like that, yeah.
I don't know when it was, but I know it's very old. But that's part of the reason why I like it. Because it's very old, it is also agnostic to any of the technology we use today.
Right. Totally
So
agree.
therefore, you do not get bogged down with like, click this button, learn this
Yeah.
in this tool. No, you're learning the concept that work. If you use that in Power BI, if you use that in Fabric, if you use that in XYZ, you still learn the same concepts. And I think it's really good, like a really good read compared to like the others that sometimes fall in the pitfall of learning you the buttons to click without learning you the concept. So teaching you the
Yeah.
concept. So I think both
Right.
as a good balance is between the two. So yeah.
Yeah, but this is its own field on its own, because like data modeling and star schema, Kimball, all of that, you can take degrees in this, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
This can
absolutely.
really be the foundation of all the
And
like fluffy things with technology you do on top. So
And that's
yeah,
why it's also
poor
that's
thing.
why it's so hard, because most people have not done all of this before and they don't want to read all the books, right? So how do we help them get that proper foundation? That's really a core
Right.
worry of mine, is like, if they don't have the time to do this, right, how do we even help them get started so at least they have some kind of star schema? So at least they won't fall into problems that Eugene just described from like the first second they enter our product when we talk about Power BI.
There's a book, I don't have it on the slides. It's called like Agile Data Warehouse Design. And I found that book helpful from a vocabulary perspective because it had the whole like 5 W's and 1 H of who, where, why, when, what. So whenever you're trying to design this, but it described transactions as business events.
Yes.
And that made so much more sense than talking about facts. Like when people say a fact table, I think like Guinness Book of World Records or like the CIA fact book or something. Like, I don't care how many Chihuahuas live in like Southern Ontario, right? Like, I don't care about facts. I care about business events, invoices, work orders, the stuff that makes the business money. And so for me personally, I found the Agile Data Warehouse Design book to be helpful as well.
I just pasted the link into the chat. I think this is it, but I'm not entirely sure.
I will check. Come on.
So yeah, no, and you're
Yes.
absolutely right. For me, it
Yeah, that's
really
it.
helped to start to take a step back and also just write some stuff down on paper. Like, what are the, like, stop looking at a computer screen for a second. Like, write it down. Like, what are the things that we really care about? What are the actors? What are the entities? What are the topics or business events that I want to capture? For me, event is always a bit hard because event sounds to me like something technical happened, like, ooh, a sensor went off, right?
Oh, sure.
So for me,
yeah, especially when we talk about event streaming. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, makes sense.
Great. Awesome. Sorry, I'm derailing your
No, you're fine. Well, I think the one other thing I want to say, because I think we covered a lot of the high level stuff. Let's see if this is the right one. So performance isn't an issue until it suddenly is, right? And I kind of already touched on this, but Power BI for most use cases, for most people, works great on its own, right? If you're not making 100 measures, if your data is, less than a quarter of a gigabyte, I've had plenty of customers where that's the case, or you have 10 million rows or less, or you do try to do the star schema, a lot of it just works. And so unlike with databases where you know you're going to pay for performance and consumption, and so you're thinking about this ideally from the very beginning, a lot of people don't think about it until suddenly someone's complaining. Oh, that's the wrong one. Until suddenly someone's complaining and now you need to fix it, right? And so one of the things that I think is important is to have a strategy. And the strategy is pretty simple. It's isolate, measure, and modify. So isolate means either run something like Performance Analyzer or Phil Seymour's Refresh Analyzer, or one of those things that can give you statistics, or do the stuff by itself, right? Don't refresh the whole page. You can manually refresh a single table, a single visual, run a single query. And then you need to measure it, because you can try to eyeball it. You can be like, oh, which visual finished faster? But the problem is that you can get some noise from other applications, from things that are running concurrently, and you have no guarantees about order, right? There's a limit to the parallelism with Power BI. And so, okay, maybe this finished faster because it ran first, as opposed to being the quickest. So you need a way to measure, which a lot of those tools provide. And then you start modifying stuff. Sometimes that means just guesswork. Sometimes that means trying to follow those best practices. So avoid many-to-many relationships, bidirectional filtering, use a star schema. But over time, you'll start to learn internals, and you'll learn, oh, DAX uses run length encoding. And so I want to avoid unique columns wherever possible so I can get better compression.
Right.
All these sorts of things. And so I think this is kind of the last big sort of thing is you just need to get comfortable with this process and then do it again and again and again.
Right. And also here's the issue I have with like internet and social media. So if you start searching for this, somebody says, oh, run, you know, the encoding of DAX and the AS engine is the issue. And here you are, just a, you know, novice user and going like, I have to worry about encoding. What does that even mean? Right. So all this information out there, but it's really hard to understand which information is relevant for you at this point in your journey. Right. As you said, you will learn about internals eventually.
Right.
You shouldn't have to learn about our run length encoding from day one.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, you know, we talked about like patterns and anti-patterns with Fabric. That's where patterns and anti-patterns and best practices help a lot, because you can say, all right, I don't need to know every single thing. I'm just going to try to follow these things. And then over time, as you start to understand, you can know when to make exceptions, because every once in a while you do need bidirectional filtering, like if you're doing row level security. But also your intuition gets better. And so you start to design stuff that's correct from the beginning because your intuition says this is the way to do it. So yeah, it's a learning process. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think something people who are working with Power BI and learning this stuff should be forgiving to themselves, because a lot of them don't have a programming background. If you write code and you're able to do breakpoints and print line and all this stuff, then you know some of that troubleshooting process. But if you're just trying to do data analysis, like this is something that you may never have had to learn. Maybe your troubleshooting was figuring out why the Excel formula broke, right? And that's about it. And so it's okay that this takes time to get a feel for.
Yeah. So, and also there's one trick. Wasn't it on your slide, the 2 CSV and 2 JSON, which is kind of like the poor man's version of a debugger for DAX?
No, I don't think I have that. No.
Because we introduced those functions a while ago, right? To just take any result, any variable value basically, and say, hey, I just dumped this to CSV or to JSON, right? And these functions were not introduced because of us wanting to give you a poor man's version of a debugger, but they were introduced for other reasons. But people have started using them for that.
Sure.
And I think that's great, because it gives you a way to kind of step through your thinking by just dumping it, like almost like a print line, but just dumping it into a CSV or a JSON format, and then you can easily copy paste it into a tool that kind of like gives you nice formatting, because of course we didn't do all of that, but it gives you better insight into what is exactly happening after you looked at the DAX and went like, yeah, this makes sense. Okay, what's the result? And if there's like oh wait, this number doesn't match up because it's the wrong result, or it doesn't work this way, or it's on the lower aggregation level than I actually expected at this level.
Right.
Okay, let me make some changes, and that can also inform your performance as well.
Yeah, that's a strength, I think, of Power Query and a challenge of DAX is Power Query. You can click through every single step and be like, oh, I see what it is.
Yes.
I would so love, send eventually, just go to ideas.fabric.microsoft.com to be able to see every stage of DAX. Because the thing is, like, it's like trying to write a regular expression. You forget one comma or something, you've changed the whole filter and changed everything, you know?
Yep.
And so something that would allow me to see what the inner row context is and the outer and all that stuff would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
What do DAX do first? Because that's also sometimes you mess up with the queries, because you think it's gonna execute this one, but actually it's gonna do that first, and then everything just doesn't go as planned.
You almost have to read your DAX from the other way around, right? Like it's inside out, not outside in.
Yes.
Like when you read your DAX, you need to start at the lowest level and then build up from there, instead of like going the other way around, because it's not reading from top to bottom necessarily. If you look at a DAX query or a DAX statement you run, it's not going, oh, let me do line 1, then line 2, line 3, line 4. No. It's looking at what the lowest grain is and then computing that and then applying all the other things on top. So it's actually going back up.
Yeah.
So that's something to just consider.
I did a quiz question on that with Calculate based on I can't get the name wrong. Renato Lira had a presentation about Calculate evaluation order, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would have thought like, oh, it goes from left to right. And it's like, no, it goes from outside to in. And so if you're nesting stuff, like you can completely mess it up. There's probably date logic I've screwed up for customers because I didn't understand that. So
Yep. You read it inside to out. That's how I like to think about it. And then right to left almost, right? So if you see a calculate, the thing that's in the front, the first parameter, is not the most important thing. Right? So calculate really is a weird function, because it's, calculate something given this context. So the something, the first parameter, it's in the front, but it's not the most important thing of that statement. Given this context, the second and whatever n parameters that follow is actually the thing you want to be looking at, not the first parameter of what it calculates. So that's what's going to make or break your analysis. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting and also a little bit complicated kind of way this was built. I hear you, and we might be able to provide some help sometime in the future, but who knows?
Yeah. But I think that's mostly what I want to cover. I think Sandeep might be teasing you in the comments right now, saying, "Yeah,
yeah." I don't know what he's on about. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, I thought VisiCalc was like an Apple program in the 80s or something. I'm not sure.
We call iCalc. By the way, I was listening to a podcast. I recently learned about the iSmell. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's from the beginning of the 2000s, where a company actually tried to make a device that you would plug into your PC with USB, and then your website could have a pixel on it that told the device to woof out a certain scent.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I'll look it up and I'll paste the link into the chat. It's awesome.
Sure you will. Oh my goodness.
But yeah, the visual calculations will help a little bit, but I don't think to the extent that Eugene is after. I think you want
right. I'm pie in the sky. I want like the equivalent of Power Query step through. I want to be able to like click on a set of parentheses and it'll tell me what filters are being applied at a given context evaluation. That would be my dream. But for the time being, I'll use DAX Studio and make intermediate measures and break stuff up, and I'll be happy with what I get.
Right.
All right. Okay, cool. Maybe that was great, Eugene.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for a really thorough run through.
Pleasure.
Even though we didn't give you that much time, so that was a challenge, but you did well.
No, this is awesome. I love it. Thank you so much for being willing to share your experience and your knowledge. So where can people find more about like performance tuning? Is it stuff that can go somewhere? Is reach out to you and just give you a call and say, hey,
well, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Show up at your house?
Yeah, just show up here. Yeah, I mean the weather's not too bad right now, so you can just come.
Oh, look at that.
No, so my blog is sqlgene.com, so sqlgene.com. My new course that just launched, it's live now. It's training.sqlgene.com. And if you want to get 50% off during launch week, I made a code just for y'all called diagnosing. And I'm on way too many social media platforms. So you'll be able to find a link there on my blog I'm on everything, unfortunately. But I'm very excited about this stuff. And module 1's free. So you can go on YouTube at SQLgene, or you can go to training.sqlgene and go to the course. Module 1's completely free. It'll tell you how to find the problem, and then you have to pay me to fix it. So that's the business model. It's a freemium kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I love it. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for building that kind of stuff. And
yeah,
also,
and hopefully it helps people, even if they don't give me a cent. Like my dog Tyson and my husband would appreciate it, but if you don't give me a cent, hopefully it'll at least help people feel a little bit less lost with this stuff. Because when I was trying to put it together, I made that diagram that we saw, and I started smaller, and then like, am I missing anything? And it's like, oh well, there's DAX optimizer and report analyzer, and like suddenly it just balloons. So it can be overwhelming.
Right.